Hello, Garland Nixon here with Margaret Kimberley and Liberal Contradictions Exposed from Goose Steppers to Gaza. We got plenty to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Margaret Kimberley. She's the senior editor over at Black Agenda Report, and they've been letting the liberals have it ever since ever since I started reading Black Agenda Report. So let's talk about this, Margaret. Just a little start off. I remember reading Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. Black liberals of all strains, the more radical black leaders, the more radical, assertive type, the more, friendly, let's get along with everybody and love through the church kind, all the kinds, Martin Luther King, whoever. And at some point, they would all come to the conclusion, the liberals ain't our friend. They would all sooner or later say, okay, we got issues with the conservatives. Fair enough. We know who the conservatives are. They're conservative. It's in the name, right? But the liberals are like, yay, we're your best friend. And we always end up screwed worse with them because it's like they're like the enemy in the gates. You know what I mean? The spy in the camp. What are your thoughts on that before we get going?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, Martin Luther King talked about in his letter from the Birmingham jail about the white moderates. Malcolm X talked about Democrats and Republicans. One's a fox, one's a wolf. So absolutely, liberalism, the failures of liberalism, that's what brings about fascism. Everybody's talking now about Trump and how he's like Hitler and how Hitler took over everything in a certain number of days and blah, blah, blah. Is just like, and nobody mentions the failure of liberalism in Germany that led to Hitler. That's the problem. We have a liberal class, represented by the Democratic Party, which doesn't want to change anything. They have a slightly different politics, but not really. They are also captive of corporate interests, captive of an oligarchic class. So they will talk about helping people, but then when there's a demand to raise the minimum wage, they say, oh, the parliamentarian won't let us. Then, of course, being so, milquetoast, they lose an election because they can't keep all their voters, obviously, because they don't do anything for people. Then you have, Trump and Musk. And Trump being Trump is going to let Musk destroy his presidency. That's my prediction. But at any rate, what do you hear from them? Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of Democrats in the House, he said, well, we're trying to figure out if we have any leverage because they run everything and it's really their government. I thought it was our government, first of all. But I remember whenever a Democrat is in, if you criticized Obama, if you criticized Biden, you were told, well, they didn't really have a majority. They didn't have 60. A majority's not really a majority. The Republicans can obstruct them. And what I'm saying to Democrats is, well, whatever Republicans did to obstruct, can't you do that to Trump? But they don't want to because their oligarchs don't want them to. And so you are right about this dynamic, and Malcolm X or Martin Luther King or anybody paying attention knows that liberalism is not our friend. Liberalism is just a maybe milder version of conservatism. At the end, everything is bipartisan. Ukraine, bipartisan. Supporting Israel, bipartisan. Tax cuts for the rich starts with Bush. Obama makes them permanent. I could go on and on and on. So you're absolutely right about how liberals are harmful to the people.
Let's go one further. You know, I, I never thought I'd see the day to see it. The liberal resistance is coming around to resist peace. You know, I'm always like this. I'm like this. You know, I'm a lefty. Sure. I tell everybody I'm a lefty. You know, I tell people, where my lefties? My dad was a longshoreman in the Union and in ILA and marching on the picket line. That was my introduction to politics. So, you know, you figure that's where my legacy comes from, right? Okay. But now the Democrats are like, yes, we must stand up against Trump because he wants to get a peace deal. Look, I don't want to go die in a nuclear holocaust. And now the one thing that they can finally decide they want to stand up against Trump. Here's what I would say. He's fired a bunch of federal employees. As a person who identifies with the working class, I would say, yes, it's a good thing that they're looking at USAID and these regime change monsters. Clean them out. Don't ask me to stand up and say, oh my God, they're going after the FBI. No, go after the FBI. There are areas that have been in the enemy of the left for years, right? Not a piece, but now the Democrats, USAID, the FBI, nothing about that much about federal workers being except USAID employees. Those are the ones they don't want fired, right? And when Trump's like, for whatever reason, I don't care. All right, let's get a deal with Putin. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that as quickly as possible. And Bernie Sanders and the Democrats are out going banana. The only things they can stand up against are the things that are in our best interest. Margaret.
Well, you're absolutely right. Now, USAID is a weird agency. It does provide aid, and now that they've killed the agency, there's literally food going to needy people that's rotting and has to be thrown out. Of course, that made USAID the perfect place to be an arm of the U.S. intelligence state and overthrow governments and cook up regime change plots. So that's why the USAID existed as it did.
Hey, Margaret, do you remember USAID when they were trying to overthrow Venezuela? They had all these food trucks on the border, and then they drove them in, and then they set them on fire or something, and they said the Venezuela. So it's like that. To me, that's the perfect example of what they do. They bought food, they drove it to the Venezuelan border, they set it on fire. Oh, Maduro just got rid of the food, therefore he has to be overthrown. So anyway, it can be nuanced. But anyway, go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. And getting rid of Maduro, overthrowing a democratically elected president is a bipartisan policy. Democrats, Republicans, Bernie Sanders, they all sound the same. So it is a good thing to normalize relations between the US and Russia. It is very dangerous for these nuclear agreements to all have expired, for the US to have weaseled out of them. Now, Trump did this too, his first term. So if he's serious about normalizing relations and actually bringing back those nuclear agreements, that is a good thing. I cannot argue against it. I don't know why anybody wants to argue against it, but we see the liberals are they're the biggest warmongers. They are the ones who support. When people speak up about these things, it's usually conservatives. It's who will speak up about these issues. Rand Paul. I'm sorry, I was blanking on his name. Somebody like Rand Paul might speak
Thomas
up.
Massey. These guys will say, let's not go to war.
Not one Democrat. So the U.S. has been supporting the government of Ukraine, not just with weapons. Ukraine's government is entirely funded by the U.S. Everything a government does for its people, the mail delivery, the roads, the hospitals, the education system, everything in Ukraine is funded by the US. That means funded by the people here who are told they don't get anything, who were told after the COVID programs expired, you're getting kicked off Medicaid, you're losing your SNAP benefits. No, we're not raising the minimum wage. I mean, I could go on and on with the things that the U.S. is doing for people in Ukraine, who, as you point out, it's a neo-Nazi, very racist country. I found a video that I put on Twitter in 2020, Ukrainians marching for saying white lives matter. I mean, in Ukraine, really? And the big sign in English, but it's really, it tells you everything you need to know about the problem of liberalism. They are pro-war. They're really right wing. This whole 3 year long, this stupid futile effort for Russian regime change or weaken their economy or whatever the hell. I mean, trying to sanction everything. Russia's economy. They dealt with the sanctions. They were able to keep it from damaging their economy. They still sell their oil and gas all over the world. Their army now is stronger than it was 3 years ago. And they're losing. Ukraine has lost the war. But people want this to go on. It's partly because of propaganda where, when I tell people that 2 years ago, there were peace talks and the US and UK scuttled them and made sure that the war continued, people look at me like I have two heads. Well, if you don't consume any independent media, you don't know. If you depend on the New York Times and the Washington Post and the networks, you have no idea that this is what happened, that the West thwarted the Minsk agreements, that the West continued to encroach NATO eastward. And all of these things led to Russia, what they call their special military operation 3 years ago. And that this can and should end. There is no benefit to people in this country, to people anywhere in the world, to continue this stupid proxy war against Russia. Now, Trump is not, he doesn't have my politics. He wants to get at China. That's always his goal. And if the U.S. is friendlier with Russia, maybe they can isolate China, but considering what they've done to both countries, I doubt if this is going to be as easy as he thinks. But at any rate, there is no downside, none, to ending this war in Ukraine. And the Europeans, I have no sympathy for them. They have gone for this. Look at Germany. Biden blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. They cut a deal with Angela Merkel at the time with Putin because they needed Russia's gas. The US blew up their pipeline. Germany said nothing. They said nothing. Denmark's crying about Greenland. The explosion was actually within their territorial waters. They were supposed to investigate. They shrugged their shoulders. They said, somebody blew it up. We don't know who. We have no idea. Now they're trying to cry. So these European countries, they're going to destroy their own economies in this bizarre effort to weaken Russia. Trump is not against NATO. He just wants them to spend more for defense, which they can't afford to do. So they're impoverishing their own people they've been doing it. They did that for Biden. So those are, I think, the important things to think about in this moment.
Here's something that's interesting, and that's why I named this the Liberal Contradictions Exposed. Okay, all of these things that we're talking about are glaringly obvious, right? You can look, anybody who knows the historical context of the Ukraine conflict, the Weimar Republic, all this, you're like, okay, those things we clear. The Democrats wake up. Like one day, I literally have heard people say on YouTube, well, there's not, somebody will be like, well, what about the Nazis in Ukraine? Well, there's Nazis everywhere. After Joe Biden literally said the reason he ran for president was because of Charlottesville. When he saw these Nazis running around, why he couldn't put up with that, and he had to stand up and bring justice to the world, right? Okay, everything is anti-Semitism. If somebody says, hey, I think maybe the Palestinians perhaps aren't getting a fair shake, oh my God, you're an anti-Semite. In come the head knockers with billy clubs to beat students on the campus and drag them away for being anti-Semitic. When they haven't said anything but, hey, there's a human rights issue here. Perhaps we should talk about human rights. Nope. That's anti-Semite. You're an anti-Semite, and there's Nazis everywhere. We can overlook Nazis because they are pushing back against Putin. Okay, that's what we've gotten from Democrats for the last 4 years. They wake up on the 21st of January. Trump's a Nazi. Well, Elon Musk is a Nazi. That guy's a Nazi. Everybody's a we've got to stand up against fascism and Nazi. And I'm like, I'm just sitting here and I just want to slam my head against a tree saying, I can't believe that I was screaming at you guys. Like, look, listen to this. I got like the harshest penalty on Facebook. Like 90 days I couldn't go live. I couldn't post for 60 days. I mean, I got like, the guillotine of Facebook, right? Here's why. Because I put up an NBC News article, and that NBC News article was talking about Ukrainian soldiers on the front line with Nazi insignias on their helmet. NBC News article. I put it up. It was still up on NBC News, but I put it up on Facebook. And, Facebook being the liberal enclave that it is, why they were so upset at such an unthinkable thing that they gave me almost the death penalty, right? And now all of a sudden, everybody's a Nazi. They're opposed to Nazis. Everybody's a fascist. And the anti-Semitism. Well, wait a minute. If guys are goose stepping around screaming Sieg Heil with Nazi, and you can't take a picture. And for the last 4 years, you cannot take a picture of a Ukrainian soldier and not find a death's head, some kind of a crooked cross, wolf's angle, Nazi's icon. It's impossible to do that. And now, the 21st, they've suddenly taken on opposition to fascism and the anti-Semitism and all that crap. Your thoughts on this unthinkable moral contradiction?
Well, first let's talk about Facebook. Facebook, they take all their foreign policy advice from the Atlantic Council, which is NATO. It's a soft power arm of NATO. So if you say the wrong thing, and of course, if this was when Biden was in office, you couldn't say anything against the government of Ukraine. I took to saying a European country that starts with the letter U or something like that. Other people did as well to keep that from happening. But I remember the early days of the war, then they started airbrushing them out. But at first it was like people would notice, wait a minute, isn't that a Nazi insignia on that soldier's arm patch or whatever? Of course it was. Then it was, well, their president's Jewish, they can't be Nazis. It's a weird country where oligarchs, many of whom are Jews in Ukraine, run Ukraine, but it still has these vestiges of right-wing people who were traitors during the war. It's a weird country, divided. Part of it didn't want to be part of the Soviet Union, part of it did. The eastern part is Russian speaking and actually more left-wing than Russia now. And the other part is they were Nazi collaborators, one of whom was feted by the Canadian Parliament to their great embarrassment a couple of years ago. That was pretty funny. But you're absolutely right that you can't talk about Israel at all. I mean, Harvard University has adopted this definition of anti-Semitism as any criticism of Israel. Any criticism of Israel can be deemed anti-Semitic. People have lost their jobs. Kids have been kicked out of school. And that is fascism. That's fascism. That's a textbook definition. But you're not allowed to say that. So now Trump, and last year it was like, Trump's a Nazi, Trump is Hitler, Trump is Hitler's cousin, Trump is a reincarnation of Hitler, Hitler. Then Trump gets into office and the Democratic Party, who's supposed to be the opposition, is shrugging their shoulders about Hitler. What are you going to do about Hitler? Well, it's their government. We're trying to figure out if we have any leverage. We don't really know anything about how to fight Hitler. Now, I think this Elon Musk thing, Trump being Trump, instead of just being the president, an elected president with control of both houses of Congress, a supermajority in the Supreme Court, and just coming up with an agenda and a so-called opposition party that's really just chicken poop. Instead of that and just getting whatever he wants, he's going to link up with Musk, who's alienating white people. You see these people who voted for Trump. Now they're mad. They're telling their Congress people to put a stop to, Elon Musk asking every federal employee to explain what they do, as if somebody's actually going to read 2 million emails. It's so stupid. But this is the thing. People who supported Trump, who are now very angry and want some kind of pushback. Trump, because he's listening to some wackadoodle billionaire, is threatening his own agenda, which he could easily get through. So I don't like Trump. I don't like Elon Musk. I don't want any of it, but they have the power they have because liberalism has failed the people. They failed politically. They failed their supporters, and now we're seeing the result of that, and we're seeing people who are even people who think of themselves as leftists saying that the U.S. should keep pouring money down a rat hole at the expense of people here. You can't continue this war without hurting people here, and they don't even talk about that. So yes, there's plenty of contradictions about people throwing around the word. I think we should ban the word Hitler, frankly, unless you're talking about World War II history. Everybody stop talking about Hitler because it's an excuse for people to be stupid and to hide behind some really retrograde thinking and policies.
There's no ability. I get attacked. There's no ability to nuance because
No.
Do you believe what they're doing to USAID? And I said, I know USAID's history. I would be perfectly happy if somebody scatters it to the wind. Hopefully we can find a way to help the needy, but let's help the needy here too. They're going after the FBI. Abolish the FBI. There we go. That's a hat for me. They've never done anything but come after leftists, anti-war, so-called hippies, people who are opposed to the system. They're like the government's secret, but they killed Martin Luther King. They killed everybody that got in their way. They killed them. So, and now we got like black people and Democrats running around. Can you believe what Trump's doing to the And when I say, hey, it ain't your friend, there's something wrong with me. I'm now a Trumper because I nuance it and say, I don't want them to fire these federal employees. They're working class people who have a job with benefits and all that. Hey, look, they're wasting money. Wait a minute. Musk has $18 billion in contracts. Let's not fool ourselves. Number one. Number two, if they save $5 billion of paying employees, they're going to take that and put it in military bases. If you're going to spend the money and the government's going to spend it on working class people. Don't just waste it on some trip to Mars. That's what we're firing working class people so we can have enough money to go to Mars. I'm not in favor of it. But here's my point. I did want to get to Europe. I don't know what the hell to think of these people. I used to look at movies, downfall, different things about Hitler, and you see these people marching around and just, Hitler would tell them to go do something crazy, and they would be like, well, we can't possibly win that battle. We're all going to get smeared. And Hitler would say, go, we will win the battle. And they'd say, yes, let's go, knowing that they were all going to get smeared. But Hitler told them, and I'm like, how irrational was Germany? Now I understand. I'm looking at Frank. I'm looking at Keir Starmer. The guy's got nothing. His army is roughly the size of the New York City Police Department and far less well armed, I might add. Right? His economy a shambles. He's got nothing. And you'd think this guy still is leading the British Empire of 1894. That they have India and they've got the Gurkha soldiers. He's got nothing. And he's like, we must stand up to Vladimir Putin. I'll send troops. How many troops you got? A dozen and a half or so. And we'll have guns for him in a year or two. But we must stand up. And I'm like, you're so irrational. And you had one job. You said we will ensure that the Minsk Accord is adhered to. And you did everything you could to ensure that it wasn't adhered to. And then when the war started, you said, that was all a fraud, so we could rearm them. And now you expect to be involved in the in the peace agreements. And the only part they want in the peace agreements is to stop them. Hey, can you involve us in the peace agreement? Sure. What's your plan? Well, our plan is to stop peace. No. Anyway, I'm getting hyped up, Margaret. You see where I'm going? These people are, what the hell? One last thing. We couldn't do this in Europe. If we were in Germany and we said, I think the government is wrong, somebody would smash our door down at 4:30 in the morning and drag us away. And Trump, and you're saying J.D. Vance, they're fascist? Everybody's a fascist, but that, Margaret.
Well, you're absolutely right. England is a nothing. I mean, the UK is a nothing country. Let's just be honest. They don't have an empire anymore. They're not a financial player anymore. They have a permanent seat on the Security Council at the UN, which needs to be changed, frankly. They got nukes the US gave them. They've been impoverishing their people. That's been speaking of bipartisan policy, the Tories, the Labour Party, all of them are the same. Keir Starmer is prime minister because he purged the left from the Labour Party. And he's talking nonsense. They have like 40 tanks or so. I mean, literally, they cannot do anything militarily anywhere in the world. It's a joke. The same thing for France has, I think, a better economy, but it's the same thing. If they spend as much as on their military as Trump wants, they'll be broke. Their people are angry. This is why right-wing forces are winning across Europe, because of ineffective liberalism. So you are absolutely right about the EU. I don't know how to describe the EU. The purpose of the EU was to make it easier for capitalists to move their money around and to send low-wage workers from poorer European countries to richer European countries. That was it. That was the purpose of the EU. It's really all just a joke, and they're all panicking because Trump says stop a war. I do understand it. I see why this is happening, but we have to call them out. We have to say what's really happening so that these liberals are so dangerous. They're actually angry that a war is going to end. Look at Ukraine, where they are literally dragging men off the street, dragging men out of their homes to get them to join the army. They have a huge problem with desertions. So their own people know that the war is over. Everybody knows this is over. Everybody knows there's not going to be any regime change in Russia. You're not going to tank their economy. But they want to throw good money after bad and not ever admit failure. It is the strangest thing I've seen in a long time. But that tells you about larger contradictions of capitalism and its failures in the U.S. and around the world.
Well, the thing that I find so overwhelming is, look, you and I can sit in a room and we can pick this up and say that's an ink pen. There is a material reality here, right? We can say it's an anaconda. We can call it anything, but there is a material reality that we have to accept. This is an ink pen. In another language, maybe there's another word for it, but there is an absolute thing that is sitting here that you can use to write with, and maybe you could poke somebody in the eye. I don't know, throw it, use it for a fishing weight, but it's designed to write with. Okay. These Europeans are in this fantastical storyline where one day these kind and gentle Ukrainians with a very nice and democracy was just sitting there, minding their business, doing nothing. And Putin woke up and said, I think we should take them out first, and then we'll head for, the English Channel, right? It's clear that they ignore the Minsk Accords. They ignore the document that came from the Russians that said, hey, guys, we need to talk because we got problems on our border. To which the NATO said, Russia doesn't get a say in this.
Yep. To
which the State Department, Blinken, said, this is not even a starter. And Russia in that said, if this doesn't happen, there could be, and I think they put it military/technical. They said, we don't want to go to war. Here's a document. Can we please talk? Nah. And then at some point early, they said, I remember this, the Westerners said, this will have to be dealt with on the battlefield. And I remember Lavrov saying, perhaps you should historically look at how things work out when Russia deals with things on the battlefield. You're on our border and we're a superpower and we're different. We didn't kick your ass. And at that point, maybe you'll be ready to talk. They still aren't ready to talk. I'm convinced that we're up to these lunatics before Trump that they'd have went all the way up to the edge and we'd have all got nuked because they couldn't accept the reality of the situation. All you have to do, look, I got to say this. Tulsi Gabbard, she's the DNI. I've heard her talk. I heard her talk to Congress, and she said things, and you're like, that's true. I don't care who you are. That's true. And you look at these people. Jeffrey Sachs the other day, he goes to the EU, and he just says things that you should know. I'm not Jeffrey Sachs. I could have made that speech. You could have too. And people are like, can you believe what Jeffrey Sachs said? I'm like, well, it wasn't hard to write that one. He didn't need a great speech writer for that one, you know. But this inability to live in the real world, to get locked in this fantasy world to a point where they risk nuclear conflict, and Trump has to bail him out because he lives at least you can disagree with his economic policies, form anything, but it's obvious that the Trump people kind of live in the real world. And this is what stumbles me about why I'm befuddled looking at these European liberals.
Well, it's, the Trump people have their own fantasies about, DEI being responsible for everything that happens. I mean, even because of years of underfunding the FAA and the lack of air traffic controllers, a military helicopter hits a passenger jet, and the fault is DEI. It's not anything to do with what Trump and other presidents have allowed to go on. So they've got different fantasies. But in this regard, you're absolutely right. I think these people are insane. The U.S. and Russia were on the verge of nuclear war. And the Biden administration, this Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, they were the worst foreign policy team that I can remember in my life. And I'm 65 years old. They were the worst. That they had these fantasies that they could get rid of Putin or impoverish Russia, or and that doesn't, and everything that doesn't work, they up the ante. There's no thought of a plan B. Okay, this didn't work. Let's try. No, their plan B is always something even more bizarre. So then they thought that they could have a nuclear brinkmanship with Russia. And this was needed. It is to save the planet. The biggest threat to the planet now is ecocide. It's global. Every month, a new record is set in the Earth's warming, in the Earth's temperature. That's the biggest threat to life on Earth. But the second biggest threat was nuclear war. And now there's a chance that that will not be the case. So we need intelligent people. We need people to say, yes, Musk and Trump are wackadoodles, and no, they can't take apart the federal government and replace every federal responsibility with AI robots or whatever it is they're trying to do. It's important to say that, but it's also important to say that this Ukraine conflict has to end, and it will end when the U.S. is out, because the Europeans, as we've both pointed out, they cannot do it. They need the U.S. as a partner, except they've been allowing the U.S. to run their countries into the ground. And they also live in a fantasy world and don't have, their alternative is sovereignty and socialism, if you ask me, but they don't want to do that. So they succeed in a coup in Ukraine 10 years ago. Then they tried the same thing in Belarus. Then they're canceling elections in Georgia and Moldova. Let's do the same crazy thing over and over again. And hopefully this time, it will stick. These people are out of their minds. They are incredibly dangerous. And if Trump is sane about this one thing, I am happy about it. It is imperative that the U.S. and Russia have normalized relations. There is nothing good about the American president not talking to the Russian president. There is nothing good about that for anyone. And for these liberals, what are they calling themselves? Ukraine Solidarity Network. They talk about another bunch of crazy people and morons who are actually, they're pro-war. That's all they, under the guise of helping the Ukrainian people need real sovereignty for their country. which was taken from them in the Obama administration with that US-backed coup. And the Ukrainian people need to not be dragged off the street to be cannon fodder, to be blown to bits by Russian artillery. That's what the people, if you care about the people of Ukraine, you will let this war end. You will work to end it. There is no other sane alternative. And it's up to us to, I don't know, we're like Cassandra speaking the truth and nobody will listen, but we're going to do it anyway.
Well, the other part is this. You brought up something. I saw somebody I know who is a, dyed in the wood liberal Democrat, right? And they had this big yellow and blue thing on there. Yeah, you know what I call it? And you've seen this. I've called it bluello, the color of propaganda, right? Bluello. Look, I watched this football, Super Bowl and all that. I'm Washington Commanders fan from way back, right? My weakness, right? So there's the line of scrimmage and the line they got to get to. One's blue, one's yellow, Ukraine blue. You know the game. You turn on TV, every advertisement, there's bluello. You ride down the street, they got fire hydrants painted bluello. I got to say this. This is the biggest propaganda operation I have ever seen in my life. I would storm drains, bluello. Every corporation's in on it. You go, like I have MedStar Health or whatever for my health insurance, right? You go there, their colors are now bluello, and they go around and there's a sign to go here, there, it's bluello. This mind operation of making everything kind of like always constantly remind you. And I think of it like this. You stand with Ukraine. Imagine I'm lying on the ground and there's 5 guys beating me with baseball bats. And somebody comes along and says, I want to help Garland. And I'm like, well, perhaps we could find a way that they're not beating with baseball bats anymore. They're like, no, I'll give you a toothpick to defend yourself. Is that standing with Garland? I'm not better off if I'm being beat with baseball bats. I'm better off if you find a way. Maybe you could talk to the guys. Hey, guys, would you like a beer? You look kind of tired. Yeah, all right. Off they go to drink a beer. I'm not getting beat anymore. I don't care what, bribe them, lie to them, anything you want. But how can you walk up there and say, I'm going to give you a toothpick to defend yourself from 5 guys with baseball bats? Why? Because I stand with Garland. That is the logic of that. I stand with Ukraine. There's no way they can lose. Win. They've lost like literally 1 million people. Their country's blown to smithereens. The people have left across the border. They have electricity a few hours a day and getting worse. And the way you stand with them is to continue the carnage.
I'm thinking of your analogy of the toothpick against the baseball bats, but basically, yes, that's it. And Zelensky's not the first guy who did the U.S. bidding and then was discarded. So can we stop, please? Lest we forget, remember Saddam Hussein was America's friend? Remember the U.S. helped him use his chemical weapons against Iran?
We installed the Ba'ath Party. Originally, the CIA, we got the Ba'ath Party installed. Because they were kind of socialists, but they were rabidly anti-communist. So the U.S. got them in power. And then the Ba'ath Party leader, why we had to overthrow the government? Because they were, I don't know, whatever.
Yes. And then, of course, then Saddam Hussein gets in the way and they hang him. The same guy they helped attack another nation. So they changed their mind. There's new administration. And it's like, sorry, guy, Zelensky should stop crying. At least he didn't get hanged like Saddam Hussein. He'll probably end up in Israel with his parents or something and write books. But at any rate, this is not new for the U.S. And I hate to give Trump credit for anything, but he is being consistent. Now, last year he did get the Republicans to go along with Biden's plan to give more money to Ukraine. So I wasn't sure he was really going to do anything, but it's pretty clear he wants normalized relations with Russia, and that means no more support for this crazy proxy war, which is a good thing for humanity. But when you have the propaganda. You're absolutely not. I remember in 2022, you could not turn on your computer without seeing the blue LO. It didn't matter what you were doing. Ukraine here, Ukraine there. Speaking of immigration, how many Ukrainians did the U.S. admit? It was
Like
thousands.
300,000 or something in one block, and they kept coming.
Yes.
Or shall we say they kept goose stepping across the border?
All they had to do was show up at the Mexican border, and they were in.
Exactly.
And now they're U.S. Green card holders, and eventually they'll be citizens. Same thing in Canada and other countries. So all these concerns about immigration disappeared when it was Europeans, right-wing Europeans. But so yes, you are absolutely right. The degree of propaganda, the ridiculousness, the Biden administration, the last thing they were trying was there were North Koreans in Ukraine.
Oh.
There are several thousand. And I said, why have I not seen a picture? There's no video. There's video footage of everything in Ukraine. Battle scenes, knife fights, everything. I didn't see one North Korean. That's because they weren't there.
Well, they left. If you notice, they left on the 20th. Like when Trump got elected, like within literally, I don't know if you noticed, within days, they said the North Koreans have had such heavy casualties that they've decided to leave. Conveniently, right after Trump became president, they all left because of their Although, and here's the thing, we killed tons of them. They came in waves. Wasn't there one body?
No, well, there was one. Remember, there was one guy they captured. Then they said he killed himself, and somebody else was captured, but he died. So,
oh, yeah,
but that's the level of insanity that these people are spreading among the people of the world. That people can believe just anything they say, and people are bringing back Russiagate. People who I used to respect are bringing back Russiagate. Putin has put Trump in office. Trump just loves Putin. People I respected. It's it's another litmus test. Anybody trying to spread that nonsense, I have to X them out.
Yeah, I can't do it.
And but that's the end result of this craziness of really trying to control our reality, to conduct a genocide in Gaza, but tell us that Israelis are the victims, to tell you that you didn't see that. You didn't see that picture of a baby blown to bits. You didn't see those houses bombed. No, that's not true. You're not seeing people being starved. None of that's true. The things you're seeing, oh no, that's not true. And if you stand up for it enough, you get punished. You lose your job, you're harassed, you're doxxed, you're kicked out of school, because you dare to say that the emperor has no clothes, because he doesn't have any clothes.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that I just look at these Democrats, right? These diehard Democrats, and they think they can go back to 2017 and put on their pink hats and march around and tell us how bad Trump is. And again, I'm a lefty, so I'm happy for any anti-war stuff. But economically and culturally, there's a lot of ways. I'm a lefty. I'm not one of these liberal lefties. I'm a old school, marching on the picket line kind of lefty, right? But I look at it and I hear these people, and I look at it and I'm like, well, wait a minute. On so many issues, I look at the Democrats over the last several years, and I got to be honest with you. They're worse than Trump. They're worse than Trump on foreign policy. Clearly, I look at the Republican Party, even though I'm a lefty and I may not agree with I don't agree with their policy. Certainly, stopping war, I'm good with your Trump people. But the foundation, look, we know that the uniparty Republicans don't like that, but they're being dragged along. Fair enough. But they had a primary, and they voted the guy they wanted, and he went in, and they all got in line behind. The Democrats had no primary. They put what, in my opinion, is the stupidest person I have ever seen in my life as their nominee. And then they told us she was smart and she was wonderful and she was so. And I watched her, and I've never seen anything like it. I'm like, I can't believe that you would put this person out. I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes thing where she was babbling incoherently, always babbling incoherently. So you put out a person there, you tell me she's smart, you rob your own voters. 2016, 2020, and 2024, you rob your own voters. So when it comes, and then you tell me we've got to stand for democracy. Trump is stealing our democracy. And I'm like, sometimes I don't even know how to answer. Trump stealing democracy. I'm Margaret.
Well, I mean, first of all, let's go back to 2020 when they rigged it for Biden. They got rid of Bernie. They realized Trump could lose. They decided to remember, they all dropped out the same day, all the other.
Super Tuesday about Obama. And guess what? It came out of the Obama camp that he had said, well, if it looks like that Bernie's going to overwhelmingly win, then he'll step in. And that's what happened. In other words, if the voters choose somebody that our donors don't like, they can't have them. Well, but you're standing for democracy.
But, the thing that's funny to me is Bernie's just a liberalish reformer. He wasn't going to change anything, but they will not stand for anybody, even somebody ineffective like Bernie, to get a toehold in at all. So they get rid of Bernie. People notice Biden's not well. Looks like he has some kind of cognitive decline. What were we told? No, he has a stutter. And I said, I've been looking at Joe Biden's since the 70s. I have no recollection of him having a stutter. Suddenly, it was a stutter. He gets to be president, and as always the case, his decline worsens. No, he's fine. These are deep fakes. You're just a Trump supporter. Everything negative. And don't believe your eyes that's what we've been talking about. Don't believe your eyes. Biden is fine. And the thing that was funny to me, I always thought of these people as being really cutthroat. I figured they'd get rid of Biden and they'd have somebody. No, Grandpa won't turn in the keys. So they let him hang around. And then it's clear he can't do it. And then they have this coup against him. But he undercuts everybody by nominating Kamala Harris. They were going to have an open convention or an open something and, have some kind of illusion of an open process instead of the primary they should have had after Biden announcing that he wasn't going to run again. Nope. They tried to have a coup. They screw it up. Biden screws it up for them. And they try to shoehorn the word salad lady in at the last minute. Do you remember her website that didn't say anything for 50 days?
Yes.
And then when they finally put something there, it was a bad copy and paste from Biden's website.
Yes,
now they had
some
money.
of the same words. It even had his name in it. It was pathetic. And might I add, they spent like $1.5 billion in 3 months. They gave they exposed Al Sharpton. This guy's taking money, and so you get all of these. Don't even get me started on Al Sharpton. This con artist, he's taking money hand over foot, and you find out she's going on people's shows, and she's handing them a bag of loot before. And I'm like, well, you got to give her credit. That is U.S. foreign policy, so they might as well do it at home. You buy off and bribe everybody. But I mean, come on. First of all, they had to do that with her. You had to bribe people because how else are you going to? And I'll be honest with you. Half the time she sounded like she was drunk. I mean,
I've said this. Well, listen, it's not just you and me. I don't know how many videos I've seen of her, and I'm like, she's under the influence of something. I don't know. She's a weird person because most politicians are very glib, and they can talk about. George W. Bush was not. Reagan was not. They'd stumble and stutter, and I guess they figure they'd gotten away with it. They could, pass her off the same way. But she's not a white man, so she couldn't get away with that. But, she was uniquely bad. I mean, she could never talk off the cuff. She did her one debate with Trump. She did well, but she can't hold it together for long. So then she's on Oprah saying she'd shoot somebody if they broke in her house. Suddenly she's a gun owner. Right. Her running mate, he's a gun owner. And I'm like, anybody, and I kept trying to tell my friends, God bless them, I said, listen, anybody who's making a decision about how they're going to vote in a presidential election based on gun ownership is a Trumper. You are not going to get their votes by having Kamala Harris suddenly claim that she hadn't tell Oprah she's going to shoot people. I mean, it was just the saddest, half sad, half funny thing, and then running around after Liz Cheney. I mean, but it's all because they didn't have an open process. That's why Trump won. Trump's victory, again, is completely the fault of the Democratic Party. Completely.
You got to add this too. Post election, the moral and rhetorical flailing of these clowns that you see. Why'd we lose? Well, because everything started off with the voters. The voters are a bunch of racists and sexist and misogynists. Clearly, and everybody's racist and sexist and misogynist. That's why. Then I heard Chuck DeHod say, "Well, you know, the Latino voters come from countries where, like Venezuela, where there's strong men, and Nicaragua, where there's." So he had to go ahead and assault these countries, of course, verbally, and they don't mind a strong man. They're fine. In other words, they're an anti-democracy. Oh, democracy, that didn't ring with them. The voters were all of a moral failure, so they didn't support the Democrats. The total inability, and might I add, two things they can't talk about. Number one, I saw something that said somewhere around a third of the voters that voted for Biden that didn't vote for her said it was over Gaza. They can't ever talk about that. They can't even bring that up. And number two, they can't talk about the way they governed. People got sick and tired of seeing some poor family in a tent because their town got washed away in North Carolina, and they're like, "What can you do for us? Here's $700. Can we have more? Sorry. We got to get more money to go to Ukraine." What about the East Palestine? Something flipped over. There's poison everywhere. Where's Joe Biden? Literally, he was in Kiev at the time. Oh, we got fires in California. We don't really care. Here's another $700, but right now we got a big part of it was the foreign policy, the way they governed. They cannot say that we governed, that there was a failure in our governing, because if they get elected, they govern the same exact way. They can't, because to do that would be to admit what we're saying, that modern day liberalism is fundamentally morally flawed and evil. I believe that.
Well, I think, do you remember when there were the fires in Maui? And Biden went there and told some dumb joke about how he had a fire in his kitchen, and then looked like he was falling asleep. I mean, so you had this man who couldn't remember. They said, well, he can pay attention until 4:00. I'm like, really? I mean, that's something anybody else would get fired for. What do you mean you can't talk to somebody after 4:00? And then, of course, there are going to be books about how they tried to hide this, and all the collusion with the corporate media and so forth. But you're absolutely right. It's what they don't do anything because their donors won't let them. It's the oligarchy. Republicans have a group of oligarchs, and so do the Democrats. And the Democrats' oligarchs will have told them, you are not to do anything for the people. You are not going to raise the minimum wage. You are not going to extend these stimulus programs and other COVID programs. You are not to do that. You are not going to get $1 billion to run a campaign if you even think about doing anything like that. And they are bought off. And that is why they don't do anything for people. And that's why Donald Trump is president of the United States again.
And remember, but what we did get from Kamala Harris, she was very clear about one thing. The United States will have the most lethal military in the world. And when I heard that, I'm like, you're simply saying, everybody over there in the military industrial complex, understand something. You're going to continue to eat very well if I become president. The one thing that she stood, well, two things. No matter what, I'm standing by Israel. Number two, for when I don't care how many people they slaughter, how many wars they start around the whole area, I'm standing with them. And now they've lost. And one last thing I want to would I get you to comment on? When we talk about Al Sharpton, right? Tap dancing for his money, like the guy on the Spike Lee movie, right? He's tap dancing for his crack money. when we talk about Hakeem Jeffries now, just looking like a sad, pathetic, and beat, but they're talking to him. His head is down. His body language. He looks like a quarterback that just threw 5. You ever look like some quarterback throws his 5th interception, and you see him on the bench, and they're like, "Let's take a look at the starting quarterback." He's like this. And they're talking to him, and he's like, "Well, what do you think there, Hakeem Jeffries?" He's like, well,
it's their government.
Yeah,
we don't have any leverage.
Trump something, I don't know. And I'm like, this black misleadership class has been exposed, and their donors and masters won't need them anymore. I mean, if you're a big donor and you're funding Hakeem Jeffries and you're funding Al Sharpton and some of these other people, and you don't get any votes and lose, you don't need them anymore. They're now worthless to their big donors. See, it's good that they got exposed, and hopefully their donors will look at them and say, guys, we put a lot of money in you guys. It was an investment, and we got nothing. And I think they're losing their value to their rich donors to sell out black people like they do.
Well, some of them, Sharpton, I think, is the one guy who will stick around. That guy is such a scoundrel. He was literally a federal snitch. Yeah. He said, he had this reputation as being a radical, but everybody knows he's really not. He's crooked as hell. As you said, Kamala Harris was paying him money to be on his show. He'll be the one survivor. I think it will be him. There will always be a Hakeem Jeffries. Maybe they'll get rid of him, but they'll have someone like that. But it shows you this black misleadership class, how they do nothing, how harmful they are for black people. And when we see a black person elevated to be the head of Democrats in Congress or vice president or anything, look out, watch out. That person's not acting in your interest. I don't care that Trump got rid of the black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff makes war against people all over the world. I don't care if it's some other, Trump-loving clown instead of the guy they got rid of. I don't care that who runs the Defense Department. Hegseth is a moron and a drunk, but it doesn't matter. If you have a defense secretary who's not a moron and not a drunk, he still makes war. That's their job. The head of the FBI, as you point out, carries out surveillance against leftists in the country. What they did to the Uhuru 3, that's the kind of thing the FBI will always do. Kash Patel, Joe Blow, Jane Doe, I don't care who it is.
I agree, certainly, Margaret. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Certainly appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. Margaret Kimberley, you can go to blackagendareport.com. Their new information comes out every Wednesday. And, when I first learned about Black Agenda Report was during the Obama, the work that you guys were doing and some of the people that was there, because they were criticizing Obama when not only was it before it was popular, it was when it was extremely unpopular. Just like people like me and Margaret, who years ago, when everybody was running around with the blue and yellow flags, were like, this, we're talking about the Maidan show, and they were calling us Russian operative, Russian bots. We were getting but we were like, the truth is the truth. Well, you guys were way ahead of me on Obama. You guys knew who he was long before, as did the Uhuru movement, I might add, knew who he was long before we found out he was simply a
tool.
An avatar for Wall Street. That's pretty much the long and short of it. All right. Thanks a lot. blackagendareport.com. Margaret Kimberley, everybody. Make sure you check it out every Wednesday. They have new stuff. Thanks a lot, Margaret. All right, everybody. Got to run. We're out.